How often should a pastor preach about money?
Well, probably more than anyone wants him to, would be my guess. A lot of times people will say that you should have some sort of financial or money series at least every year, series or message or something like that. I haven't done it that way. I've probably done it 10 or 12 times in 15 years, so a little bit less than one a year. I'd say if someone is like, man, they just want to preach about money all the time, that might be a problem. On the other hand, if people are afraid to preach about it or scared, that's a problem too. And I hope that a conversation like this could help people feel more confident about it. Because I would say for me, it went from something that I dreaded preaching about to something I actually really like preaching about.
Okay, well, talk about it. Hey, welcome back to the Preaching Through podcast. This is season 3, episode 2, and they said it wouldn't last.
Who said that?
I don't know who said it. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I'm just trying to...
Well, I mean, if you look at the statistics, most podcasts don't make it past one season.
Yeah.
So we already, here we are, season 3. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed doing this podcast, and I'm grateful that we're doing season 3. The last episode, we talked about preaching through a big change. And if you have listened to past episodes, you'll be really interested in the material that we covered, at least the first 5-10 minutes, because it goes through a big change that just happened recently with us here in Arizona and our church. And we won't get all into that right now because we're going to talk about money this episode.
Yeah.
And, y'all came on you're listening to a bad episode and, this is just really more in-house thing. That just seems to be the way that I've heard messages on money start off.
Yeah. A lot of times people apologize for it. And I think we shouldn't do that. And I get it because, there is a sense that a lot of non-Christians have of, well, the church only wants to talk about money. And so, when it happens to be that week that you're talking about money or weeks that you're talking about money, you can imagine that someone will be like, oh man, this isn't what I wanted, or, oh, I knew it. I knew and so I think you can maybe make a joke about it, but I just would never apologize for it. I think that, what the Bible makes really clear when you see the ministry of Jesus is that perhaps God's main rival is not Satan, it's money. Right? When Jesus says you can't serve two masters, he doesn't say you can't serve God or Satan. He says you can't serve God and money. And so, man, money is so connected to our spiritual life. It's so connected to our discipleship. It's such a revealer of where our trust is, what our security's in, what we're looking to for comfort or for identity or for meaning. And so it's an important discipleship thing, and we should not apologize for it. It's a great gift. What we need to do is actually preach about it well. And I think maybe that's where things have gone wrong, is that sometimes people have, experienced people preaching about money in a way that just wasn't very good. And on the other hand, I also think, not everyone's going to respond to it great. If money is a spiritual rival to God, then when we preach on it, some people aren't going to like it. And that'll be revealing in itself.
I think this is a great argument. Like the concept of preaching on, difficult topics culturally is a great argument for just preaching through expository, picking a book of the Bible and going for it, because you're going to hit particular texts that maybe you wouldn't choose to hit, or maybe that you would hit too often. And so,
well, that's probably why we haven't preached on it.
Okay.
At least every year, is because we tend to just mostly preach through books of the Bible, and not every book of the Bible hits it. We have had certain times where we've done a thematic series and we've put money in there because we know it's a relevant thing. We've done 3 building initiatives over the last 15 years. And so that inherently means there's moments where you're going to have to talk about giving. And so, that comes up, but there's also just like the last time we did a series on money, it actually didn't really relate to giving at all. It was just looking at some of the parables from Luke chapter 12 and what it is to actually be rich toward God. And so, that's, but that was like a little short series that we did to intentionally try to equip people around this key area.
I actually believe that people do want to learn about money.
Yeah.
I actually believe that people want to be taught about money, but the key difference there is that we need to do it well. And I think when you can anticipate everything, like if you're not teaching something new, if you're not revealing some sort of you're not putting in the work to teach something that maybe everybody knows. I think about this. In last season, there was an episode where you were talking about, well, I'm going to preach on love, and everybody's heard this message before.
Yeah, everybody thinks they're loving.
Everybody thinks they're loving, and I could just preach the text as is, but it's really not going to serve anybody because everybody's heard this message. So I just went home and I took a nap. I came back at it and I started to think like, okay, why does everybody think they're good at loving? What gets in the way of us loving well? And so diving into it from that perspective allowed me to really put forth the text in a way that people haven't heard before. And I think where people get tired at the church, where I get tired, is where I hear everything that I already know and it affirms the things that I already thought. And if what you already thought was negative, then it's just going to reaffirm the negative things and the negative emotions that you have wrapped up into money in church.
Well, and people need help with this, Dave, because
Yeah.
I mean, most people, if you say, hey, how was your home growing up when it came to money? People go, oh man, my parents never talked about it. Or if they did, they were yelling, Most people, Christian or non-Christian, just this is one of those things that's awkward to talk about. They don't really know what they're doing necessarily. And then you add in the Christian discipleship part of money and giving and generosity and stewardship and all that sort of stuff. And it's like people really do need help. If you look at the areas that are huge tension points in marriage, it's almost always has to do with money. I know for Molly and I, from the very beginning of our marriage, there's only one thing at the very beginning that we consistently, tensions got high, and it was conversations about money. And so, man, this is a gift to actually be able to help people. And we have to settle in our hearts that we are helping them and we are blessing them. And this isn't about what we want from them. This is about what we want for them. And so, man, we've got to be able to talk about it.
I love being able to have these conversations. And really, that's the hope, is to be one voice in the conversation of what it is for you to preach Jesus in 21st century America. That's why we do this podcast. That's why we're doing this particular episode. Money is incredibly relevant in the time of Jesus. It's incredibly relevant in our time. And to do it well, we need to slow down and maybe introduce some additional voices, some additional inputs, so that the next time we step into the pulpit to preach God's word and what it has to say on money, we do it in a way that maybe more surprising with just how Jesus thinks about money. And that's kind of the goal of Ironwood's service, to surprise people. What is it?
To surprise people with the
significance of Jesus. There it is. Yeah. And so preach money in a surprising and significant way as Jesus would do it. So let's talk about preaching through the topic of money. Your first 200 sermons are going to be terrible. This is something the late Tim Keller once said, meaning that no matter how hard you study, how many hours you put in, or how much you work on your preaching, there's this glass ceiling that can only be broken with more reps. So, getting reps becomes your main way of growing as a preacher. But what happens when you surpass 200 sermons? What are you supposed to work on? Where should you try and grow, or what muscles are you going to need to build to have a faithful and fruitful preaching ministry over the long haul? Well, the Preaching Lab is a curriculum developed by our co-host, Luke Simmons, that fills this gap and takes preachers beyond what they've learned in seminary or Bible college. This live experience provides preachers with meaningful feedback, insight, and instruction so that they can improve their preaching for a faithful and fruitful preaching ministry. During this 12-week preaching cohort, preachers learn of minor adjustments to their sermon habits that have a major impact on the preaching moment. Tweaks that nobody in your congregation has the ability or the confidence to give you. It's a deep inspection of your routines, habits, study, and preaching, all so that you can become a better steward of the gift God has given you every single week, an audience. This is your opportunity to return the favor back to your congregation and preach a sermon that is faithful and fruitful. Visit faithfulandfruitful.com/lab to learn more about the Preaching Lab live cohort, as well as the Preaching Lab on-demand video curriculum. Now back to the podcast. All right, so this is broken down into 3 different categories, 3 different issues: heart, courage, and practical. We're going to start with the heart. What are the heart issues that we want to be aware of as it relates to preaching through the topic of money?
These are heart issues that specifically relate to our own hearts as preachers.
Okay.
Right. So this is less about trying to get the hearts of the people we're talking to sorted out. It's more going, what's our heart as we approach it? And the first question that I think we need to ask ourselves is, do I want people to have a healthy relationship with money, or do I just want them to give more? That's an important heart question.
Yeah.
I mean, it says in Ecclesiastes 10:19, money answers everything. And there's definitely, I mean, if you know Ecclesiastes, you know that, Solomon tried everything and he found out that in the world, like money is kind of the answer to a lot of things. And it's the same in the church. We need money. For many of us, all or some of our salary is dependent on this. Our ability to keep the mission moving forward is dependent on the money that comes in and is given and is raised. And so it can be a dicey thing in our hearts where it's like, if we're honest, we really just want them to give. And we've got to deal with that as a heart thing and go, you know what? I want to make disciples. I'm trying to proclaim Christ, warning, teaching, so they may become mature in Christ. That's what I'm trying to do all the time. And this is an area where I want people to have a better relationship with money. And I'll just trust that one of the byproducts of that is that they'll give to the church. So I think that's a key heart issue we have to get settled.
One of the sayings in the entrepreneur world, and it really feels true, is that sales cures all. When you're having a down day and when you're just not feeling it, and then all of a sudden you see a sale come in, like, whoo, you get right back, your spirits get right back up in there. I was having some personal reflection recently, and one of the things, I took a day off, and one of the things that I realized is I care more about money than I thought I did. And it's wrapped up into a couple specific things, but rather than qualify and say, well, I care about this thing as it relates to money, really what I got down to is like, I really care about money more than I thought I did. Doesn't matter that it's in this particular area. I care more about it than I thought it, getting real about it.
Well, and that's where that's where all of us are. And that's why I think money is such an interesting trap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because money is this, it's this revealer of our other idols,
Mm-hmm.
the other things we're overly attached to. Like a lot of times we say, well, money's an idol. And I want to go, actually, for most people, there's an idol beneath that, right? For some people, money's an idol because really the idol is their security.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying, I'll be okay if I know I have enough. For other people, money's an idol because really it's about comfort. I want to have this style of life. I want to be able to have this sort of vacations. I want to have this sort of thing. For other people, money is really a look at their status. Here's how people perceive me. Here's the kind of car I'll drive. Here's the kind of stuff I'll have, right? So money, it's these other things. It's status. It's significance. It's for a lot of people, it's power, right? If I have money, then I'll have access to this kind of relationships or I'll have this kind of influence. And so that's why money is such a thing that we got to talk about, because it actually isn't. I mean, money in a sense is just money, but it's this portal into so much other stuff.
And the virtue on the other side of the idolatry, I guess the virtue on the other side is generosity. Where does the generosity begin?
Someone who has a good relationship with money, now money's not my significance and it's not my comfort and it's not my security. Actually, Jesus is those things.
Mm-hmm.
He's my significance. He's my comfort. He's my security. He's my hope. He's my future. And now money is just money. And so now I can start to steward it as someone who realizes this is all God's anyway. And I can start to be open-handed and give it away because I'm not giving away my identity.
Yeah.
I'm just giving away money.
Yeah.
Because my identity is secure in Christ.
So do you want people to have a healthy relationship with money, or do you just want them to give more? And then generosity begins in the heart of the pastor. If you don't give generously, why should your people?
Yeah, that's the second hard issue is that really, and there we're saying generosity, but it really is this whole relationship with money. If a pastor has a weird relationship with money, probably that's what will get replicated.
Yeah.
And in particular, I think it relates to generosity. I'm just stunned, Dave. The number of times that I have heard about pastors who don't give because I guess they think, well, I give by serving. I give by the ministry that I do. It's like a gift in kind of my job. And I go, that's malarkey. I mean, that's just not right. Or I hear lots of stories about missionaries who they don't, they're a missionary in Turkey, but they don't give to their local church in Turkey. They give to their missions organization. And I go, what in the world? But I think especially for pastors, if you're going to challenge people to give generously and you don't give generously, like what the heck? Like you're a phony, you're a hypocrite. You're like not using the product you're selling. And that's just, that's weak sauce.
And then the third heart issue to be aware of is really just, what's the caution there?
It's to beware of assuming that you have a right to people's money. Obviously, Jesus is hard on people who are stingy. He's hard on people who just, build up a bunch of treasure for themselves but aren't rich toward God. And so we can, I think if we're not careful as pastors, and this is a hard issue to look out for, is Do you feel entitled to their money? Do you feel entitled that they need to give it to you or give it to the church? And I just want to say, no. We got to fight that entitlement. Everything that people give is a gift, and we got to see it that way.
The next one is courage issues. What's the first thing to say about the courage issues that we have?
The first thing is that this is something you have to tackle yourself. Like, you have to preach about money. Especially if you're a lead pastor, you're the senior leader, this is your job. Especially, for me, I was a church planner, and I knew the first, I don't know, however many, half a dozen times that we talk about money, I need to be talking about it. You can't outsource preaching on money to somebody else. Now, there's times where there is someone who, man, this is a really good expert on this, or this is somebody who has a lot of experience with this. Sometimes what pastors will do is they'll go, well, we have this other elder who's in charge of our finances, and he's a financial manager person, so I'll have him preach on money. And I would say, if you're doing a whole series on money, maybe have him do a message. But if you're outsourcing it to other people, you're in a sense kind of backing away from this. You're actually reinforcing the idea that money is such a big deal that you're afraid to deal with it. And man, that is just not the attitude we want.
So where did that come from? Was that something that you had seen modeled for you? Because you said early in the church plant, I knew I had to preach on it. Well, that seems to me to be, to your credit, but to be a more mature way of looking at it, or at least at the very least, a more informed way. Where did that come from, and why were you, how was it that you were aware of that?
Yeah, I don't know where it came from, but I think anytime you're talking about something that you know has the potential to feel controversial to people, people's first experiences of that should be you talking about it. This is why I would not outsource messages on sexuality. I wouldn't outsource messages on gender roles in the church. I wouldn't outsource messages on eschatology. I wouldn't outsource messages on money. Now, I'm not saying I wouldn't at some point somewhere have a guest speaker. Like, we had the privilege a number of years ago, Sam Alberry came and he wrote a great book on Is God Anti-Gay, and gave an incredible message from his own story and experience of being same-sex attracted and yet living faithfully as a celibate follower of Christ. Well, it was wonderful to have him preach. But we had already addressed sexuality a number of times before. I wasn't kind of bringing in the heavy hitter to do the work for me, because I think people, they're going, can I follow this leader? Can I trust this person? And if they see us back away from stuff that's controversial, it signals to them, this person is a little bit weak.
Yeah, I actually remember that having come in, and it felt like a natural progression and an overflow, so to speak, of other things that we had done. And I actually appreciate that approach. And so the courage issue, you don't outsource it. The second courage issue is sometimes you have not because you ask not. That sounds very familiar.
Yeah, that's just straight out of the book of James. And people have heard enough stories about folks like George Mueller. George Mueller was this incredible pastor and started all these orphanages and was famous for never asking people for money. He would just pray about it. That's the way the story's always told. Now, it turns out he had a regular newsletter he would send out, and he would always include the financial information and make the need known. He would just never technically ask for it. But God would provide in all these incredible ways. And so people go, well, if God's going to provide, God's going to provide. And what I would say is God can prompt people to give money without you asking. He's also more likely to prompt people if you ask, and there's this reality of like challenging people to give, asking people to give, increases the chances that they'll give. So we shouldn't be afraid of asking people to give and asking people to contribute to our mission. We should be afraid of manipulating them. We should feel afraid of being entitled to it, but we should have the courage to ask.
I have a friend who does a really great job of identifying people who have a gift of generosity. They are inclined towards generosity towards the church, and they want to know what opportunities are coming up. And it's not in a way of, well, does this qualify? It's no, like, let me know of the opportunities that come up. Let me know of what the need is. And if I can pull it off, like, we'll pull it off together. But it identified, like, because they want to know of those opportunities, because that is a way that God has naturally inclined them to be generous financially to whatever the church has going on.
Yeah, I've had people sometimes, who came to find out later that they wished that me or they wished that our church had supported them in some way. And I said, well, you never asked. I didn't know you need anything. I didn't know you want anything. And so, feel free to ask.
Yeah. And then the third point underneath this courage issue is responding to being challenged. Talk about that.
Yeah, man, it's interesting. It's counterintuitive in a way, but people actually love being challenged.
Mhm.
I mean, this is a reason why, anytime there's 40 days of purpose or 30 days through the New Testament, or, one thing we've done a number of times, a 90-day tithe challenge, challenging people, they actually respond to it. They, not everybody does, and not everybody loves it, but man, I just would say, let's have the courage to challenge people in areas that relate to money. So don't be afraid of that. We've seen actually incredible fruit. We've seen incredible blessing. We've seen remarkable life change that's come about from people, taking a tithe challenge. Actually, Dave, I remember the very first time we did it. And at that time, our church was smaller than it is now. There were just 3 of us on staff, two of us full-time pastors, and then we had an admin. And I don't think she would mind me sharing this story, but at that time, I remember we were preaching through the book of Malachi, so we hit on tithing.
Malachi, the Italian prophet.
Yeah, there he is. And so we hit on that, and we issued this 90-day tithe challenge. And the way we've done it is, hey, test God in this, trust God in this, and see if he doesn't come through. Now, some churches, when they do that, they also offer like a money-back guarantee, which I guess, go ahead. I don't even know how that would work. I don't know if anyone ever asks you for it. We never offered that. That felt just a touch too gimmicky for our culture. But we said, hey, test God in this, trust him, see if he won't come through for you. And so I remember we had our little staff meeting. This was in one of our home offices in those days, and Matthew and I, the other pastor, we're kind of like, almost breaking our arms, patting ourselves on the back for how well it went, the day before. And here's all the people that took the tithe challenge. And I remember the woman who was working with us just didn't have the same enthusiasm. And I was like, hey, what's going on? And she said, I've tried tithing and it just never works. Like my husband and I struggle to make ends meet. And it just feels like every time I try to tithe, it never, we always come up short. I always can't do it, and I really didn't like this yesterday, and I didn't like the tithe challenge, and I don't want to do it. And this feels to me like you're just asking an overweight person, hey, we'll just lose 100 pounds. And you just don't understand. It's not that easy. And so she had great pushback. And I remember I had a courage moment at that moment where I had the choice to either say, yeah, you're right. It's too hard. Don't do it. Or I could say, that sounds really, really hard. And I can imagine why you'd feel frustrated. But here's what I want to tell you. This is actually from the Bible. Your issue is with God. And I said, I wonder if the reason why it's never worked for you is you've never actually followed through on it. And I wonder what might happen if you actually decided, no matter what, I'm going to do this and actually put God to the test. And she was the kind of person that responded to that sort of challenge. And so she did. Well, she had my wife and I over maybe 4 months later. To her and her husband had us over for dinner. And they just told story after story after story of how this had changed their life. They took the 90-day tithe challenge. And she said, you know what? We realized one of the places we can try to cut out some stuff so we can give more is gym membership. And she's like, and then I started running and I actually lost 15 pounds. And she started then doing marathons and stuff like that after that. They had been in the foster care process and they had been in the system, waiting to be given a child for months and months and months, and nothing had happened. And then something happened. There was this car thing that broke down, and they went, "Oh man, here we go again. We're trying to tithe, trying to test God, and now our car broke down." And then they got some random refund for something that was to the dollar the amount that they needed for the thing. They got rid of cable and said, "You know what? We've been playing all these family games together. We've never felt closer." And they just went on and on and on and on about that. And I realized at that moment, man, this is such a gift for these people. And this is a gift for their discipleship. And she's a totally different person now. I mean, that led, she actually ended up teaching classes and teaching other people about gratitude and generosity. I mean, it was a cascading, fork in the road, pivot change moment. And I just am so glad that somehow by God's grace and spirit, I didn't back down from her going, well, I don't know. I can't do this. I'm glad I had the courage to say, hey, your issue's with God, not me. Test him, trust him, And so we have to have the courage. And I just will tell you, if we'll have the courage, God will honor it.
One of the exercises that you have at the forefront of the preaching lab, which the preaching lab is it's a curriculum, it's a video curriculum, but it's also a live experience where you coach a group of, 8 to 16 preachers on improving and picking up in their preaching where seminary often leaves off and working through different areas. Well, one of the exercises you take them through is called the ABCs, the assumptions, beliefs, and convictions of preaching. And
we did an episode about those.
We did do an episode, season 2, and you start things off and you say, it's important for you to know my ABCs so you know where I'm coming from and what I believe as a preacher, and then you develop your own. Well, one of your ABCs is people want to be challenged, which is good and bad. And I think you just highlighted that there of, hey, there's some good parts to it as well, or there's some good parts to it, but there's also some bad parts, this guilt feeling or some of the other areas. Anything else you want to say? I just thought it was interesting, like you're talking about that, but that's actually core to who you are.
Yeah, I mean, the danger of challenges is that they can become legalistic. The danger of it is that it can be like, if the only way you really love God is if you do blah, blah, blah. But we just said, hey, we're going to challenge you to do this, and we're going to give you resources to help you along the way. There was a whole sequence of emails and letters. We actually told anyone, hey, if you'll do this thing, we'll actually send you this resource. We made classes available so that people could grow in it, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. But people have responded to challenge. Now, if every month is a new challenge, that starts to get tiring, right? Part of the reason it works is because even though hopefully week by week, just in our preaching, we're in a sense challenging people, we're not asking them to enroll in a challenge like this all the time. And so it makes it where if you do this every few years, something like this, man, people respond.
Hard issues, courage issues. The third bank is practical issues. Develop a way to communicate where the church is at financially. I know this is important for a lot of people. I don't particularly care to look at the budget every single week. I'll glance at it, but I know my wife, she goes through each week and she pays attention to all of that information. So is that what you're talking about right here?
Yeah, it's something like that. So the way we do it at our church, we still do a printed bulletin, printed program, and we spend a good amount of money printing those every week. But we have reasons that we could talk about another time for why we do that. But one of the things we put on there is we always put last week's giving, year-to-date giving, and then plus or minus over the budget. And so it's very simple, but it helps people track over the course of a year, like, how are we doing? And it's interesting to me because most people get that thing and that is the first thing they look at, which is just revealing in itself. So you don't have to do that. But I'm stunned by the number of churches that people don't know anything. They don't know how we're doing. And I remember, having some family that were connected to this church plant at one point, and turns out this church was really struggling financially. Nobody knew it. And so that's one of the things that I just go, if you're going to be able to teach on money, it helps if you're just keeping people informed. I mean, sometimes that is like, here's the annual where we're at. But even if it's just through weekly emails, through monthly emails, some way to keep people informed about here's how we're doing as a church. One of the things in our case, and I realize not every church is in this situation, but because our giving has historically been strong, one of the things that's allowed me to do is to be able to say, hey, we're doing fine financially. We're not preaching about money here because we're in need. We're actually doing it because we just want this for you. On the other hand, if you were in need and people knew that you were in need, then you could say, hey, I want this for you, but I also need to just be honest with you. This is an area of need for us, and we want to do some teaching on it. So having people in the loop is just going to help them trust you more as it relates to money. If you're more transparent, we'll have people all the time that especially come in our context here, Dave, in Arizona, they come from an LDS background, and where everyone's expected to give, but there's no real transparency on where any of it goes. And so for them to they're like, man, this is just in here. It's just available. It's like, yeah, like we don't have anything to hide.
Well, that goes into the next point then, and that's talking publicly through the basics of your financials. So how does that work for Ironwood?
Yeah, this is something we do usually at some point in early February. By that point, we have a fiscal year. That's the calendar year. At least that's how we do it right now. And so once that,
right now, for now,
and once that closes, then a week or two after that, we'll just do a basic thing. Here's what our budget was last year. Here's how much was given. Here's the surplus or the deficit, whatever it is. And here's what our budget's going to be for this next year. And then what we do is we make a half sheet available that has all the big budget categories. And we just put that out at the info desk and say, hey, some of you will want more detail about this. And they're able to do that. Now, we don't publish on their salary information. We don't publish it's not the full detailed budget, but it's the big picture categories. And we just say, hey, if you're a member and you have questions about the details of this, here's the person you could talk to about it. But again, it's this posture of vulnerability and openness that says we don't have anything to hide here. Builds trust.
Do you know what people give?
No, I don't for the most part. What I do, the way I have approached that is that I feel like a pastor should be able to know who gives what.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's wise when a pastor says, I never know who gives anything. I just think, well, if money's such a big spiritual issue, why would you say I don't ever know anything about it? On the other hand, it's a pretty tempting, dangerous place. And, the book of James talks about partiality and, treating people differently because they are wealthy or because they give more. That's a dangerous spot to be. And I don't always trust my own heart with that.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I have approached it is that if I have a good reason why I want to know someone's giving, I can go to our elder who oversees that and make that request. Usually for me, Dave, it's not that I want to know how much they're giving. I want to know whether they're giving.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be someone we're thinking about for a leadership role. And I just want to go, hey, are they giving?
Mm-hmm.
And are they giving in a way that we don't know exactly what they make, but does it seem like they're committed to this? That would be something. Sometimes if there's someone who's just a grouch about everything, I kind of want to go, hey, are they giving? And it's not because if they're not giving, I don't want to listen to them, but it does tell me the degree to which is their complaining constructive because they're bought in and they really care and they want it to be better, or are they just always grumpy? So that, and then the other thing that I do is I ask that same financial elder, I say, hey, give me every year, give me a list of the top 20 givers, put it in alphabetical order. I don't really want to know in giving order who gave the most. And then I will try to get time with those. And then the other thing I do is I go to our other leaders and say, hey, give me a list of your 3 or 4 or 5 top volunteers. And so I'll end up with this long list of, the top givers, top volunteers. A lot of times, by the way, they're the same people. And then I'll just try to spend time getting to know those folks and investing in them and caring for them. And just because I think a pastor should be connected to the people who are most committed to the church, whether through volunteering or giving or whatever. So long answer to your simple question.
Yeah, no. Well, as you were answering it, I was thinking, you know what? This sounds familiar. I believe you did a post on X.
Yeah, I wrote a thread about it, and different people have different approaches to it. But yeah, that thread seemed to engage people pretty well because I think it's one of those things that a lot of pastors need some guidance on.
The next thing you talked a little bit about this already, but offering financial classes to help people, what we want for you, not from you. I particularly like this because it lines up where the financial resources of the church line up where they say things are important. So this just so happens to be about money, but if the church emphasizes that something is important, this is my own opinion. If the church emphasizes that something is important, well, then equally the church should invest in highlighting how people can do that well. I think one area that I really like is, I think we do this pretty well here from what I know, counseling and therapy and things like that. Those things are important. We've talked about rightly ordered and depression and mental health, things like this. But then we also have counseling services that are provided through the church. I think that's great. I think that's consistent. And so I like seeing this on here because we say we want this for you. And to be consistent, we're going to provide resources beyond just saying you should give.
Yeah, well, a lot of times, the sermons help, but like any area of discipleship, you often need to process it in community.
Yeah.
And you need to learn even how to talk about it. So one of the reasons I appreciate offering these kind of classes is I mentioned at the beginning, the thing that Molly and I consistently fought about at the beginning was money until the church that we were at offered a crown class, Crown Financial Ministries, and it was this small group thing. And we learned a lot of good stuff about what the Bible has to say about all these different areas. But the main thing we learned was how to talk about it without wanting to kill each other, which was incredibly valuable. And actually, the way we budget today is what we learned. And that was in our first year of marriage, what we learned through that class. So I think those classes are really helpful. At our church now, we've tended to use Financial Peace Ministries, which is that what it's called?
Yeah, Financial Peace University.
Yeah, Financial Peace University. And we've offered that class. Yeah. And, my critique of it is it's a little Bible light, but we've found that for people who are trying to just get right-sized in terms of their spending related to debt, that's a really helpful thing. Here's something that I've done in particular. So when we've done the 90-day tithe challenge, I've said, hey, some of you would love to be able to take this challenge, but you have debt and you're not in a position to be able to actually tithe because you can't get rid of this debt. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to actually challenge you to not take the challenge. And instead, I want you to take $97 or whatever it costs now. It's probably more, and sign up for and invest in this Financial Peace University class. Don't do the tithe challenge. Do this class instead. And then next time we do the challenge, you'll be able to do it because you'll actually be in a place of financial freedom. And we have found people just experience incredible help through the debt snowball and through all those sorts of stuff. So whatever the classes people offer, a lot of times someone will have someone in the church who they're just good with this sort of thing. But what it does is it helps people get equipped in other areas, and it helps you with integrity be able to say, hey, this is not just me trying to reach in your wallet. I want to help you. And so here's one of the ways we can help you is by providing these additional resources.
And then the last thing, content that should be repeated. What do you mean by that? You've got some items listed down here in our notes, but I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some things that I feel like have resonated as I've taught about money over the years. So when we're thinking practical issues, what are some things that have been helpful? The first one we already hit on, which is just not apologizing when it comes to money. It's this big competitor to God, and so I don't want to apologize. I'd rather say, hey, if you're a guest, you couldn't have picked a better Sunday to be here. And so I think that's worth repeating. And you might make a joke of it and say, hey, if this is your first time with us, you probably thought, I bet they're going to talk about money. Well, it turns out you're right. And I think it's actually one of the best things that you could hear us talk about, because actually Jesus had a lot to say about money. It's one of the biggest competitors. So let's dive in.
That's one of the things that I like when often when you preach. In the last episode, we were talking about navigating change, but you'll often do that. You'll often say, we're making some changes to our structure. We're changing our name. I think it's a good thing, and I want to share with you my reasons why I believe that. And hey, we're preaching about money. We think it's really relevant, and I actually think there's going to be some things in here that you'll be able to find helpful and relevant too, no matter where you are at in your walk. I like framing it up that way.
Yeah, I just think why should I apologize for God's word?
Right.
I don't want to apologize for this. So, but that's just a helpful thing. Just if you're a guest, you couldn't have picked a better Sunday to be here. So that's something that I repeat every time we talk about it. Another principle that I repeat a lot is the idea that money is both a thermometer and a thermostat for your heart. And a lot of times we think about money being this thermometer. It reads the temperature of your heart, right? People will say, if you want to see someone's commitment to the Lord, look at their wallet and look at their time. Look at their checkbook. No one has a checkbook anymore. And look at their calendar, right? And so that's true. Money is a revealer. What you spend your money on does tell me what's important to you. But money is not just a thermometer. It's also a thermostat. It sets the temperature of your heart. And I found that principle really resonates with people and helps people a lot. Jesus said, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. He doesn't say it the other way. He doesn't say where your heart is, your treasure will be also. That's the thermometer. The thermostat says, hey, if you actually want to care about this more, then invest in this way. So that idea, money is both a thermometer and a thermostat for the heart. Third thing that I repeat a lot, and have found this to be pretty helpful for folks, is that the contrast between 3S givers and 3P givers. So most people are what you could call 3S givers. They give spontaneously, sporadically, sparingly, right? It's spontaneous. It's in the moment if I think about it, or if I'm emotionally moved enough. It's sporadic, meaning it's occasionally if I think about it. One author, Nelson Searcy, I think calls these God tippers. You just give a little tip. And then it's sparing. It's left over. It's if I get around to it. It's if I can. That's 3S giving. That's how most Americans give.
Mhm.
On the other hand, people who are committed to Christ, we want to challenge them to become 3P givers, which is giving priority, percentage, and progressively. So priority meaning this is the first thing I give. It's not what's left over. It's like, this is right out of the gate. This is what I'm committed to give. It's percentage, meaning it's thoughtful, it's planned, it's intentional. It's some percentage of my income. It's not just like, well, whatever I feel like. And it's giving progressively, meaning I want to try to give more. I'm trying to see the tithe not as like the fix all number, but like as actually the starting point that I'm going to build off of. I remember, I just hearing stories of people who said, you know what, we just wanted to try to give 1% more every year. And not everyone can do that, but that instinct, I think, is the right kingdom instinct. So that has been a helpful idea is we don't want to be 3S givers, spontaneous, sporadic, sparing. We want to be 3P givers, priority, percentage, and progressively. So that's how we want to do it. So that's just some stuff that I found helpful that seems to resonate with other folks as we preach about these things. And so those are some practical stuff to share.
One of the final question I have is, how does this stuff work into the membership class? What are you teaching members? Are you telling them that there is an expectation that they'll give to the church? Are you approaching it much like we've talked about here? It's like, hey, this is a you and God issue. Like, how does that work itself out in the membership class?
Yeah, in our membership class right now, the way we do it is communicated that one of the expectations of membership is giving, but we don't do a lot of teaching about it in there. Most of what we're teaching about in there is about just overall ownership. Taking ownership of the church through your time, through your serving, and through money. We don't get into many of the nitty gritties, though sometimes people will ask, hey, am I expected to tithe? If I'm tithing, do you tithe off of your gross or off of your net? Or how do you do that? And so, more it's just answering questions. Even hearing you ask that question is making me go, I wonder if we ought to spend a little more time on that, because it is an important part of people's discipleship.
Having some conversations about generosity and money and things like this with some buddies. And one of the things that popped up is like, well, Jesus talked about money more than he talked about heaven and what was it? Heaven and something else combined?
More than almost anything.
And,
or at least, I don't know if he talked about it all the time, but a lot of his analogies are financial.
Yeah. And so I was just thinking to that, I was like, well, I've heard that often, but like, what does that actually mean? And what does that mean for me? And what's he trying to say to me? And the more clear you can be on what your intentions are as you're trying to preach through these things, and the more clear you can be on what Jesus was actually trying to say and what he was getting at, I think that translates into not necessarily a giver, but a disciple. And out of the overflow of somebody following and wanting to follow Jesus, the money will follow. At least that's how it should work, right?
Yeah. If Jesus has your heart, he should have everything in all of you. And a lot of times people need help on learning that and figuring that out and how to get there. And that's why we're here, is to try to help people, right? We're preaching the word. We're helping people be conformed to the image of Christ. And so, this has got to be part of our discipleship effort.
With this being season 3 of the Preaching Through podcast, that means there's season 1 and season 2. You can go back and listen to. There's Preaching Through big events, so cultural changes, talks about the culture. There's also Preaching Through Tough Text, which talks about when things intersect between theologically tough and interpretively tough and culturally tough, emotionally tough. It becomes a real lot of hair on the dog, as Luke likes to say. Yeah. And so if this is a situation where you find yourself in and you're like, okay, this is great, this gives me some ideas, but technically speaking, how would I navigate? Go back and listen to some of those episodes. It's going to give you some additional insight into how Luke might approach them. And then if you have any follow-up questions, you can send a message, luke@faithfulandfruitful.com, and get some more insight maybe into a particular, or even some coaching into a particular situation that you're finding yourself in. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this podcast, to be here. We've got more episodes on the way. If you want to follow up and you say, hey, I really like this. This is great. I'd like more of this. You can go to faithfulandfruitful.com, get signed up for the pastor's newsletter there. There's a big chunk of documents that Luke has put a lot of thought and intentionality in, and we'd love to send those to you each week. Anything else you want to say before we're done here today?
I just want to encourage you guys, because this matters and it's important, and you're going to have people whose lives really change for the better when you do this. And so, don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the people who are just critical about it. The church just wants money. Trust the Lord that He'll provide what you need, and He'll actually disciple His people who are more like Christ, and they will be totally changed from it.
Awesome. See you guys next time.